Hello, this is Lynette M. Burrows. Today I'm reading from Chapter 2 from my work in progress, If I Should Die. It's Book 2 in the Fellowship Dystopia Series. Book 1, My Soul to Keep, is available at Amazon or any of the online retailers or bookstores. If you've missed Chapter 1, it is available on YouTube, on my channel on YouTube, and on my website, LynetteMburrows.com. This is the continuing story of Miranda. She's a peace-loving woman caught in a civil war and must use violence to save lives or stick to her principles and sacrifice many. A recap of Chapter 1. Miranda piloted her boat, the Lady Angelfish, on her way to rescue her brother, but the U.S. Coast Guard stopped her for a routine inspection, and they brought a second sphere agent. Now Miranda fears she'll never save her brother, and he'll never know why she didn't show. This is Chapter 2. Irene Clark Earnshaw took one more bite of the caramel cream. Sweet and light, it was the perfect finish to a perfect meal. She stole a look to her left. A thrill shivered through her. She couldn't believe that she actually sat next to President Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr. At the moment, he had his back to her, speaking to the Vice President's wife seated on his left. The low murmurs of the 80-some-odd people seated in the state dining room of the White House made his words unintelligible. The others, in their dress uniforms and shiny suits or flowing evening gowns with lace and sashes and bows, sat to Irene's left and right down the long sides of the U-shaped table. Across from her, on a diagonal, sat her miracle-working, just-ordained husband, the Prophet Felix. He sat between the Vice President's elegant wife and the Speaker's wife. They laughed politely at something he said. Everyone who was anyone was here, from the President's cabinet members to military leaders to senators and representatives. They all came to officially welcome the Prophet Felix as the President's #1 advisor. She fingered the gold-plated spoon that rested on her dessert plate, a gold-rimmed white china plate with its blue presidential seal in the center. Determined to memorize every minute detail, she scanned the room again. An official portrait of President Lincoln hung on a celadon wall to her right. Stately gold tabletop candelabras perched beside golden baskets of orange tiger lilies, red daisies, and yellow sunflowers on a fine white linen tablecloth. The sound of her name startled her. "Lady Earnshaw, excuse me. Will you be staying for the entertainment this evening?" The man seated on the inside corner of the U spoke. He had green eyes and light brown hair swept back from his forehead. "Of course," she answered. "And you?" "Certainly. Perhaps we'll have time to talk later. I could use your help with a special project." He beamed a smile of perfect white teeth. He was a doctor of some importance, she recalled. A Dr. Galloway. With his thin lips and big chin, he looked more like a college boy than a scientist. A special project? Irene didn't know what else to say. They had given her lists of things that the wife of the prophet should and shouldn't do. The lists of shouldn'ts far exceeded the shoulds. Would this project be on one of those lists? A bell rang. One of the head butlers stood in the doorway. "Ladies, please follow me." Amid scraping of chair legs across wood floors, The men in the room stood. The president's wife stood. A butler held her chair. "May I help you, ma'am?" Startled again, Irene glanced at the butler behind her. She turned back to the doctor and smiled sweetly. "I'd love to hear more." He gave a slight bow. "After cigars and brandy." She grit her teeth behind her smile. After his cigars and brandy. Indulgences deemed unsuited for the delicate sex. Not that she wanted a cigar or brandy, but all this protocol, so unlike their lives in Buenos Aires. The butler held her chair. She stood and joined the president's wife near the doorway. Mrs. Kennedy, who insisted Irene call her Victoria, took Irene's hand and guided her into the blue room for an after-dinner coffee. The blue room was a large oval parlor, the first room one entered as a guest at the White House. It no longer looked like a parlor, though. Now a silver coffee service sat on a marble-topped table in the center of the room. Small clusters of blue cushioned chairs staged around the room left plenty of space for milling about. Servers in splendid white cutaway tuxedos offered trays of assorted nuts, dinner mints, and other candies. The scents of coffee and perfume mingled in a pleasant way. Victoria graciously led Irene to the coffee table. The server, impeccable in his white coat, offered her choices of 2 Colombian coffees. She requested and immediately received ice water. The etched crystal bowl of the stemware wore the presidential shield. "That's part of the service that belonged to President Theodore Roosevelt," Victoria told her. Irene prayed that God would give her a steady hand so she would not drop such a valuable heirloom. Victoria introduced her to a small group of chatty women. Among them were the wife of the vice president and the wife of the Speaker of the House. They chatted about children and gardens and invitations to various events. Irene murmured demure and innocent comments becoming of the prophet's wife. A sinful thought flashed through her. Without trying, she was where her mother had dreamed of being all of her life. A position her mother never dreamed that she, Irene, would ever attain. She took a quick breath and clutched the stem of her water glass with both hands. For the fellowship and for Felix, she'd have to learn to be more comfortable in these situations. A slight shift brought her shoulders back a little more and her chin a little higher. Victoria rescued her from this group of ladies and guided her to another small group. Their conversation centered around gardens and children. "How are your children adapting to life in the district?" one woman asked. Irene couldn't remember her name. "My daughters are doing well, thank you." "How old are they?" "Sandra's 7, but she thinks she's older." Irene appreciated the small chuckle the woman gave. "Annabelle is around 12, we think." "Excuse me?" The woman blinked at her. "She's adopted," Irene explained. "An orphan." Images and smells flashed through Irene's memory. Mosquitoes carrying hemorrhagic Nenang fever had invaded all of Buenos Aires 2 years ago. The disease killed thousands. She shook off the horrific images and smells of the dead and dying. "Oh," said another of the wives, "she's the one, isn't she?" Irene nodded, overcome again. As senior members of the Fellowship Church of Buenos Aires, she and Felix had worked to help those stricken by the disease. They'd found a young girl in a shack that reeked of death. Parched skin and bones, her tears were pink with blood. She shook with chills and suffered from the severe pain common during the end stages of the disease. Felix prayed for God to release her from her suffering and anointed her with oil. The girl shuddered, gasped, then stilled. Felix said a blessing of the dead over her and the others. Then they washed and covered the bodies. Felix had just helped Irene to her feet preparing to leave when one of the covered bodies moved. Felix's first miracle gave them Annabelle. The prophet's first healing, the woman explained sagely to the other wives. The wives murmured appreciation, but exchanged knowing looks. Irene stiffened with the unspoken disapproval. Annabel could pass for white, no matter her actual heritage. Besides, she's my miracle child. Fortunately, Victoria excused the two of them and moved to another group. After that, Irene avoided speaking about her daughters except in the most general terms. She nibbled on some nuts and sipped water from the crystal stemware that once belonged to Teddy Roosevelt, and wished for coffee time to be over. The bell rang again. Victoria took her hand. This time they led the women into the East Room where the men also gathered. The size of the rectangular East Room, its crimson silk draperies, red marble accents, and its row of massive crystal chandeliers took Irene's breath away. With a lot of chatter and shuffling about, spouses sought each other and their assigned seats. The president sat in the first row. Irene sat to his right again, and Felix to his left. Victoria sat on Felix's left. 20 members of the United States Air Force Strings marched in and took their places in seats near the state grand piano. The Steinway itself would have filled Irene's living room in Buenos Aires. She had thought their current living room huge, but the Air Force musicians and the piano wouldn't fit in it. Irene and the other guests applauded the arrival of the conductor. The lyrical Tchaikovsky's waltz from the Serenade for Strings filled the air. The musicians played a wide, varied program that broke for an intermission after a rousing rendition of God Bless America. Irene excused herself for a powder room break. Before she exited the crowded powder room, she took 5 slow, deep breaths, braced herself, and returned to the East Room. People milled about, blocked her path to the front. Around her, dignitaries congratulated her and murmured other appreciations. She smiled and nodded until her cheeks hurt. Lady Earnshaw, may I steal you away to a quieter corner? Dr. Galloway towered above her, taller than he'd appeared at the table. She offered him her arm. He escorted her to the nearly vacant back of the room, released her arm, and faced her. I apologize for intruding during this celebration, but I've been unable to reach you. Irene cocked her head at him. Why not? She'd been spending most of her time at home, alone. The girls spent their day at school, their afternoon with the fellowship-provided nanny, and of course Felix was consumed with being the prophet. Your phone number is unlisted, and the secretary at the church was, shall we say, protective. The secretary at the church? Were you trying to reach the prophet? His broad, slightly crooked smile charmed her. Not at all. Projects like this have always been the purview of the wife of the leader of the church. Oh? She'd heard nothing of such a project, but the Lord knew she could use something to keep her busy. Why haven't I heard of this project before? It's a need-to-know kind of project. Irene pulled back a bit and gave an uncomfortable little laugh. Need to know? Sounds dangerous. His smile widened. Not to you, dear lady. Never to you. Well, I am intrigued, she admitted. Tell me about this project of yours. The overhead lights flickered. Around them the muted murmurs grew louder. Shoes clacked and chairs scraped and screeched across the floor. Time to return to our seats. Not here, he said. Here's my card. Call me at your convenience tomorrow. She took his pale gray business card. It had his name, Louis Galloway, M.D., Ph.D., printed in the center, and a post office box address in the lower left corner with a phone number in the lower right. She turned it over. The back was blank. She looked up and caught a glimpse of Dr. Galloway before he vanished into the crowd of guests returning to their seats. And so ends Chapter 2. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate all of your support. I look forward to hearing your comments and suggestions or corrections if I misspoke. I also wanted to say how very much I send wishes for your best health for you and your families and your friends. This is a difficult time, an unprecedented time. We will get through it, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.